Hello, welcome to Manibil. I just last night I sat through a half hour sort of what's it called reaction video by Stefan Molyneux about a woman calling herself a child-free woman, which is sort of that's very common among women that they try to use words to their advantage, right? Changing the narrative using words is a very common thing among women because it's like words is their weapon. So that's how they get around in the world, is by changing definitions, changing descriptions, or honing the description so that the people get a different understanding of what is going on based on the words alone, right? So that's just a side note, right? And that's also why I believe there are quite few women who are philosophers and actually good philosophers, or you know philosophers with the right approach, and not just feminist philosophers, right? But the feminist philosophers, they will try to control a narrative using words, generally, in my impression, right? And because philosophy is about describing things accurately without trying to use words to your advantage, right? Only in the sense that you want to get it as clearly defined as possible without being able to saying, well, I want to define it this way, and by using this word I'm getting to get to this kind of reaction in people and so on, right? Okay, side note. The woman here is some kind. I don't think I ever seen her or heard about her before, and sort of she's apparently a known person, or a celebrity of some kind, who has made a video about how easy it is to be a child-free woman. She's not encumbered by having children, right? So kind of making a virtue out of a necessity, I guess, because she's obviously post-war, right? Which means she cannot have children. So now she's making virtue out of a necessity. That's a very well-known kind of coping mechanism, right? But it's actually not the. I'm basically I'm on board with basically what Stefan Molyneux says here, right? I have my beef with his philosophy, but his way of analyzing, what people discuss and how they come across, and their psychology, and their, whatever, these kinds of more sort of, average, everyday kind of stuff. He usually had a very sharp eye for, getting under the, just under the skin, and explain things in a in terms that are more like explaining why they do it rather than just eating it raw, right? So fine, go listen to the video, for all I care, right? But he does something here at the end of the video. He explains something, and he moves his hand about in order to, clarify, using, you could say, well, what's it called, sign language, using his hand to clarify the meaning of what he says. And this has metaphysical connotations, right? And that's what I want to get to. I don't really care about this video about this, hot milf, right? You can watch that if you want, right? But it's like I have a beef with Stefan Molyneux, and every time he makes a video, I might have a listen with half an ear, and if there's something that I sort of jump on, free market philosophy, I might take a stab at it, right? So it's when he explains something that is metaphysical about mind and so on, watch how he tries to, what's it? I'm looking for a word now. Using gesticulations in order to clarify the words he's using about mind and brain and so on, right? So watch out for that.
So everything that she does, that she says requires happiness, is the result of other people having children, including her own happiness. And to be given the great and enormous gift of life, and life is such an unbelievable privilege. I honestly, I don't want to sound too sappy, but like every single day I am aware, and maybe because I had a cancer flyby or whatever, but I'm aware every single day of just what an enormous privilege it is to be alive, and particularly to have a human conscious mind. That is the rarest gift in the entire universe, and the only gift that has the capacity for virtue, depth, communication, longevity, and meaning. This is an amazing gift. To be given this.
So, he said, and I don't know if I can quote it directly, but he's talking about the brain and the mind, right? And then he does like this, right? He shows with gesticulating that it is encompassed by the skull, right? I mean, he hasn't explained where he thinks the brain is, but to the best of my understanding of his philosophy so far, right? He thinks there is a brain on the other side of the skull. And within that brain, or the brain is encompassing, sort of in a spatial fashion, right? The brain is encompassing the mind. So he's basically saying, listen carefully, right? That his mind is limited to some spatial realm that is on the other side of the skull, right? So when he shows his hand here, he's basically saying, this hand is outside my mind. Because he's using the hand to point and say, it's in there, right? So he is pointing to a metaphysical paradox without realizing it, right? He's saying, this hand here is outside my mind, right? But he's using it to point to where his mind is. How can he do that? How does that work from his point of view? If you are putting yourself in his place, right? As if, I'm working from the axiom that I have a similar kind of experience, and I have a representation of those. I have experiences which are representations of something outside myself. And when I'm referring to something outside myself, I'm actually referring to experiences, but communicating to that outside I do not have access to, in the hope that that will trigger, a response in that other mind that I do not have access to, that I can communicate back to me in a fashion that I can, understand as language and meaning, right? So it's that circle of information and axioms that is difficult to get a grip on, right? That, usually ends up in the hard problem consciousness, and the problem of the minds is being violated, or, something like that. Solipsism, the mind matter, dualism, Cartesian doubt, whatever, all this shit that is sort of very quickly becomes violated or confusing, right? But if we take for granted that he understands me as being on the other side of this mind of his, right? He is communicating to me using something that he classifies as being implicitly, he doesn't say it directly, but implicitly he says this hand is outside my mind, because he is sort of indirectly pointing to that mind as being on the other side of the skull, while his hand is obviously outside the skull, right? So what I'm pointing to is, and it can be difficult to explain this, right? Though when you get it, it's quite simple. What he is referring to has to be an experience. He has to be experiencing that hand in order to refer to it or use it, or otherwise, what is he actually doing, right? He is referring to that hand. And how can that hand be outside his mind if he needs his mind in order to use it to point to his mind? It can't be. It can't be outside, right? So I'm not saying that that hand is inside his mind and therefore I do not have access to it, right? Because his body is outside his mind, the actual body, not the representation of it, which I have in my mind, and he has a version of that hand in his mind, and we are correlating it using language, right? But we have two different views of that hand. And that hand is in his mind, in his version of the hand, and his hand is in my mind, in my version of the hand. But since we're using the concept hand, we can talk about the same object without disagreeing, right? And being objective about it. The end point is that that hand must be a part of his mind. Otherwise, he can't refer to it and he can't use it to point, right? Because he wouldn't be aware of it, because he wouldn't experience it. So there wouldn't be anything in that sense, right? So how would he points to a paradox he doesn't resolve, he doesn't identify, because he's using his hand to point that inside here is everything is going on in here. And if he thinks that it's not everything is going on in his mind, that which he can refer to, then how the hell does he get to it, right? How does he get to any kind of outside of his mind? If he needs an experience of it in order to have any idea that it's there, right? How does he square the circle? It's implicit in the way he says it. He doesn't say that this is outside my mind, but implicitly he's saying it, right? He's very much into, trying to identify what people are actually saying implicitly, right? You are implicitly saying that, if you're talking to me, you accept that language has meaning and all these kinds of arguments, right? Well, if you use your hand and point to your brain and say there's a mind in there, right? You are actually saying that this hand is outside your mind. How can it be, right? It must be a part of your mind, otherwise you can't experience it, right? And if you can experience it without mind, how the hell do you do that, right? Please explain, Mr. Philosopher, right? Okay, see you in the next one.